They say every mistake feels small until the moment it swallows your life. For me, it started with the decision to take the back road. It was late, dark, and the storm clouds pressing low on the horizon promised trouble. But the highway was clogged with trucks, and the idea of snaking through the forest with only my headlights for company felt peaceful. It wasn't. The rain hit suddenly, a barrage of bullets on my windshield. The wipers swiped furiously, but I might as well have been driving blindfolded. The road was narrow, winding, with deep ditches on either side. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles ached, cursing under my breath. Then I saw it, a flash of movement, pale and quick, darting out of the trees. A deer? A person? I swerved without thinking. The tires screamed as the car slid sideways, the rear fishtailing on the slick pavement. I don't even remember hitting the tree. Just the violent crunch of metal, the sharp snap of my wrist against the steering wheel, and then, darkness. When I came to, the rain was still falling, though gentler now, like the storm had lost interest. My car was angled in a ditch, the hood crumpled like a soda can. Pain pulsed from my wrist, jagged and hot, and every breath felt like knives in my ribs. I fumbled with the seatbelt, my fingers trembling as I tried to free myself. The night was impossibly quiet, save for the hissing radiator and the distant rumble of thunder. I craned my neck, looking through the cracked windshield. The road was empty. No headlights, no houses, nothing but the dark stretch of forest that seemed to lean closer with every passing second. I wasn't alone. It wasn't the kind of thing you see, more like a shift in the air, the weight of being watched. My skin prickled as I scanned the tree line, expecting to see eyes glowing back at me. But there was nothing there. Just shadows. Until I heard it. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, squelching softly in the mud. Panic clawed its way up my throat, and I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The metal frame was warped, trapping me inside. Hello? My voice cracked, weak and pathetic. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was only the rain. Then a face appeared in the driver's side window, illuminated by the dim glow of my dashboard. A man, older, maybe late 60s, with a face like carved stone. His eyes were deep-set and shadowed, his lips thin and pale. He rapped his knuckles on the glass. "You alive in there?" Yeah, I think so," I stammered. The man nodded, more to himself than to me. "Hold tight. I'll get you out." He disappeared from view, and moments later, I heard the groan of metal as he pried the door open with some kind of tool. His strength was surprising for someone his age. "Can you walk?" he asked, reaching in to help me out. "I think so," I said, though the moment I put weight on my right leg, pain shot through my knee like a hot poker. "Car's not going anywhere tonight," he said, glancing at the wreckage. "Nearest tow truck's miles away, and this weather won't let up. My place isn't far. You can rest there till morning." Everything about the situation screamed don't go. But what choice did I have? My phone was dead, the road was empty, and the nearest sign of civilization could have been 100 miles away. "Thanks," I said, leaning heavily on his arm. His house was a hulking silhouette in the distance, barely visible through the rain. As we got closer, I could make out its sharp angles and narrow windows, the way it seemed to crouch low to the ground, as if hiding from something. "This is it," the man said, pushing open the heavy wooden door. The air inside was cold, carrying the faint scent of mildew. The entryway was cramped, lined with old photographs in tarnished frames. I tried not to stare, but the images were unsettling, black and white portraits of children with hollow eyes, men and women with expressions frozen somewhere between smiles and sneers. "Name's Arthur, by the way," he said, leading me down a narrow hallway. "You?" "Lydia," I replied, wincing as I hobbled after him. "Bathrooms down the hall, first door on the left. Kitchen's straight ahead. I'll grab you some ice for that wrist." He disappeared into the shadows, leaving me standing alone in the dimly lit corridor. My reflection stared back at me from an antique mirror on the wall, pale and wide-eyed. The kitchen was surprisingly modern, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. Stainless steel appliances gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, and the counters were spotless. Arthur returned with a bag of ice wrapped in a dish towel and a steaming mug of tea. "This should help," he said, setting them in front of me. "Thanks," I said, though I couldn't shake the unease coiling in my stomach. Something about this place felt wrong. I sipped the tea, trying to ignore the way Arthur watched me. His gaze wasn't threatening, exactly, but it was too intent, like he was studying me. "You're lucky I found you," he said, breaking the silence. "Not many people come this way." Could have been hours before anyone else drove by. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. Arthur's eyes flicked to the window, where rain lashed against the glass. "Storm's getting worse. Best if you stay the night. There's a room upstairs. I'll show you." I wanted to protest, to say I'd be fine on the couch or even the floor, but my body was screaming for rest. The guest room was small and sparse, with a single bed and a dresser that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Arthur lingered in the doorway, his hand resting on the frame. "Sleep well, Lydia," he said, his voice low. As soon as the door clicked shut, I locked it. It wasn't long before the creaking started. At first, I thought it was just the old house settling, the kind of noise you'd expect from warped floorboards and rusted hinges. But the creaks grew louder, more deliberate, like footsteps moving up and down the hallway outside my room. And then came the whispering. The whispering started softly, like a breeze stirring through leaves, except there were no leaves and no breeze. Just the suffocating stillness of the guest room. I sat up in bed, every muscle tense, straining to catch the sound again. It came from the hallway, faint but unmistakable. Elwewewewewedya. My name. I froze, gripping the thin blanket like a lifeline. It wasn't Arthur's voice. It was too soft, too melodic, almost sing-song. I told myself it was the wind, though I didn't believe it. I told myself it was just exhaustion, the lingering effects of shock from the crash. But then it came again, louder this time, accompanied by a slow, rhythmic creaking. Footsteps. Someone, or something, was pacing back and forth outside my door. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, wincing as my injured knee protested. The room felt colder now, the air heavy with the smell of damp wood and old fabric. My phone was still dead, useless, but I kept it in my hand as if it might ward off whatever was out there. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I waited, my pulse hammering in my ears, but nothing happened. Slowly, I got to my feet and limped toward the door. The floorboards groaned under my weight, loud enough to make me wince. I pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. Relief flooded through me, irrational and fleeting. I started to turn back to the bed when the whispering came again, directly on the other side of the door. "Open the door." My breath caught in my throat. The voice was so close it could have been speaking into my ear, separated only by an inch of painted wood. I backed away, bumping into the dresser, and sent a ceramic lamp crashing to the floor. The shattering sound was deafening in the silence. "Lydia?" Arthur's voice boomed up the stairs, sharp and angry. Heavy footsteps pounded toward my room, breaking the spell of terror that had pinned me in place. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking, and yanked the door open. Arthur stood in the hallway, his eyes narrow and his face half hidden in the shadows. "What's going on in here?" he demanded, his gaze flicking to the broken lamp. "I heard something," I stammered. "In the hallway." Arthur's lips thinned into a tight line. He stepped past me, peering into the room as if expecting to find someone hiding there. "There's no one here," he said flatly. "But I heard." "It's an old house," he interrupted. "It makes noises." "That wasn't the house," I said, my voice rising despite myself. Someone was whispering my name. Arthur's expression darkened. "You've had a long day." Get some rest." He turned and started down the hallway without another word. "Wait," I called after him, my voice trembling. "Can you stay? Just for a little while?" Arthur paused at the top of the stairs. He didn't turn around. "Lock your door," he said. "You'll feel safer." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading into the creaking floorboards below. I locked the door again but didn't go back to bed. Sleep was impossible now, with my pulse racing and the whispering still echoing in my ears. I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the window. It was small, square, and too high for me to see through without standing. The storm had slowed, the rain now a gentle patter against the glass. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, even though the window faced nothing but the empty forest. I told myself to stop being ridiculous. Then the glass fogged over, as if someone had exhaled against it from the outside. I froze, my stomach flipping. Slowly, a handprint appeared in the condensation. I bolted for the door, my injured knee screaming in protest. My hands fumbled with the lock as I threw it open and stumbled into the hallway. The house was silent, except for the pounding of my heart. I limped toward the stairs, the old boards groaning under my weight. "Arthur?" I called out, my voice small and desperate. No answer. The air grew colder as I descended, and I wrapped my arms around myself for warmth. The kitchen light was still on, casting harsh shadows that seemed to shift as I moved. "Arthur?" I called again. Still nothing. Then I noticed the basement door. It was ajar, a thin sliver of darkness spilling into the kitchen. I hadn't noticed it before, it must have been closed earlier. A faint scraping sound drifted up from the basement. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like nails dragging against stone. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to run. But where would I go? My car was wrecked, the storm was still raging, and Arthur was my only lifeline. "Hello?" I called, stepping closer to the door. The scraping stopped. "Arthur? Are you down there?" No answer. I reached for the doorknob, my fingers trembling, and pushed it open. The staircase yawned before me, a steep descent into pitch-black nothingness. A faint metallic smell wafted up, sharp and unpleasant. I reached for the light switch, but it didn't work. The bulb must have burned out. "Arthur?" My voice echoed, the sound swallowed by the darkness. I took a step down, then another, my hand gripping the rickety railing. The air grew colder with each step, the smell stronger. I was halfway down when I saw the faint outline of a figure at the bottom of the stairs. "Arthur?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure didn't move. "Arthur, is that you?" Silence. I took another step, and the floorboard creaked loudly beneath me. The figure shifted, just slightly, enough to send a jolt of terror through me. I turned to run, but my injured knee buckled, sending me sprawling onto the steps. Pain exploded through my leg, and I bit back a scream. When I looked up, the figure was gone. My knee throbbed, a sickening pulse that blurred the edges of my vision. The steps beneath me were slick, damp with something I didn't dare think about. But I didn't care about the pain or the cold. All I could think about was the figure. Where had it gone? I scrambled backward up the stairs, my palms slipping against the worn wood. My breath came in shallow gasps, the air thick and cold like I was inhaling smoke. Every shadow seemed alive, every creak of the old house amplified to a roar in my ears. When I reached the top, I shoved the basement door shut and leaned my weight against it, trembling. My heart raced, my pulse hammering so loud it felt like a second storm in my skull. What was that thing? Was it Arthur? No. Arthur might have been strange, but he wasn't that. The silhouette had been too wrong, too fluid, its movements unnatural. I glanced around the dim kitchen, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering faintly, casting uneasy shadows. My reflection stared back at me from a stainless steel toaster, pale and wide-eyed. I had to find Arthur. Arthur! I called, forcing strength into my voice. Silence answered me. The hallway leading to the living room stretched like an open maw, the overhead light failing to reach the end. I limped toward it, each step a jolt of agony in my knee. The walls seemed to close in as I walked, the shadows twisting and folding around me like they had a life of their own. I paused at the living room's entrance. It was eerily still, the faint smell of mildew clinging to the air. A grandfather clock in the corner ticked rhythmically, each sound like a nail being driven into my nerves. Arthur? I said again, softer this time, as though speaking too loudly might provoke something lurking in the dark. The leather armchair in the corner was empty, its back facing me. The fire in the hearth was dying, the embers glowing faintly like watchful eyes. I strained to listen, hoping for the sound of footsteps, a cough, anything human. And then I saw it. The reflection. In the glass of the grandfather clock, a figure stood behind me, distorted and faint but unmistakable. It was taller than Arthur, too tall to be anyone I knew. Its outline was jagged, angular, like it had been pieced together from broken glass. I spun around, my knee almost giving out beneath me. Nothing. I backed into the living room, my breaths shallow and rapid. My eyes darted to every shadow, every corner, searching for the figure that wasn't there. The house felt alive now, the air vibrating with an unseen presence. Arthur, where are you? I whispered, not expecting an answer. The clock chimed suddenly, a deep, resonant sound that made me flinch. I turned toward it, heart pounding, and saw something new. The pendulum had stopped moving. The clock's face was smeared with something dark, dripping slowly down the glass. Blood. My stomach churned, and I stumbled away, bumping into the armchair. Something shifted beneath my hand. A sound, wet and soft, like a bag of soaked fabric hitting the floor. I looked down. The carpet was dark, sodden with something thick. A trail of it led from the armchair to the hallway I had just come from. Arthur, I whispered again, though the name now felt hollow. My gaze followed the trail back to the armchair, and I saw the edge of a hand peeking from the other side, pale and unmoving. No. I limped around the chair, each step feeling heavier than the last. Arthur's body slumped against the cushions, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His eyes were wide, lifeless, his lips parted in a final gasp. His throat was torn, as though something had shredded it with claws. I staggered back, a scream caught in my throat. That's when I heard the breathing. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Arthur's. It was low and guttural, like a growl dragged through water. I turned toward the hallway, and there it was. The figure stood at the end, its silhouette sharper now, more defined. Long, thin arms hung at its sides, ending in claw-like hands. Its head tilted, an almost curious gesture, as if it were studying me. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to move. It stepped closer, the light catching glimpses of its face, or what should have been a face. Its features shifted like smoke, a blur of half-formed eyes and a mouth that twitched and stretched unnaturally. Lydia, it whispered, the word bubbling like tar. The sound shattered my paralysis. I turned and bolted, pain lancing through my knee as I stumbled toward the front door. My hands fumbled with the deadbolt, slick with sweat and trembling uncontrollably. The air behind me grew colder, the presence pressing closer. The lock clicked, and I yanked the door open. Rain lashed against my face as I stumbled outside, the storm now a full-blown tempest. The wind howled, carrying whispers that sounded like my name. I didn't stop to look back. The forest swallowed me, its trees looming like skeletal sentinels. Branches clawed at my face and arms as I ran, the mud sucking at my shoes. My knee screamed with every step, but adrenaline drove me forward. Somewhere behind me, I could hear it. The slow, deliberate crunch of footsteps. It wasn't running. It didn't need to. Elwewewewewedya. The voice drifted through the rain, impossibly close despite the distance I thought I'd gained. I stumbled into a clearing, gasping for breath, my chest heaving. The storm had turned the ground into a swamp, and I sank to my knees, the mud sucking at my hands. And then I saw it. A window. It was low to the ground, its frame set into the side of a hill. The glass was fogged, but light glowed faintly from within, warm and inviting. Desperate, I crawled toward it, my hands slipping in the muck. I pressed my face to the glass, squinting to see inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a basement. The basement. Arthur's house. And I was staring at myself, crouched in the dark, my eyes wide and filled with terror. Behind me, the door creaked open. I recoiled from the window, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle the scream rising in my throat. The rain soaked through my clothes as I sat back in the mud, staring at the glowing frame. Inside, the version of me crouched in the basement moved, jerky and disjointed, like a puppet with tangled strings. It wasn't just a reflection. It was alive, an eerie, wrong parody of myself. The figure turned its head sharply, its gaze meeting mine through the fogged glass. Its lips twisted into a crooked smile, revealing teeth that seemed too large for its face. "Lydia," it whispered, the sound somehow carrying through the glass, through the storm, through my very bones. I scrambled backward, my injured knee screaming in protest. The hill loomed behind me, its roots slick with rain, making every movement a fight against gravity. Above me, the wind howled like a living thing, the trees bending and groaning under its force. "Lydia." This time, the voice wasn't from the window. It was behind me. I twisted around, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. The shadowy figure from the hallway stood at the edge of the clearing, barely visible through the curtain of rain. Its form seemed to ripple, its limbs elongating unnaturally as it took a step closer. I turned back to the window. The other me was gone. The basement was empty now, save for the faint glow of light spilling across its damp walls. A part of me wanted to stay in the clearing, to let the rain and mud swallow me whole rather than face what waited beyond. But another part, a desperate, primal instinct, pushed me forward. I crawled to the window and pushed against the frame. It gave way with a groan, opening just enough for me to slide through. My arms and legs screamed in protest as I pulled myself inside, the damp air of the basement wrapping around me like a cold shroud. The window slammed shut behind me, as if pulled by an invisible hand. The basement was darker than I'd anticipated. The glow that had beckoned me now seemed dim and feeble, casting weak shadows that flickered like candlelight. The walls were lined with shelves cluttered with jars of murky liquid, old tools, and other objects I couldn't identify in the gloom. My breath came in ragged gasps, echoing in the stillness. I strained my ears, listening for the sound of footsteps above. The house was silent. Too silent. "Lydia." The whisper came from deeper within the basement, from the direction of a door that stood slightly ajar. Faint light spilled from the gap, illuminating the rough stone floor in front of it. "No," I whispered to myself, shaking my head. My whole body screamed at me to turn back, to climb out the way I had come, to run into the storm and never look back. But something compelled me forward. I limped toward the door, each step hesitant and deliberate. The air grew colder as I approached, the metallic smell stronger now, tinged with something sweet and rotting. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow hallway lined with more shelves. The light came from a single bulb hanging at the far end, flickering faintly. My footsteps echoed as I moved down the corridor, the sound unnervingly loud in the suffocating silence. The jars on the shelves seemed to watch me, their contents shifting and swirling as I passed. At the end of the hallway was another door, this one made of heavy wood reinforced with iron bands. A symbol was carved into its surface, a jagged spiral that made my eyes ache just to look at it. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle. It was cold to the touch, almost painfully so, and for a moment I hesitated. But then the whisper came again, louder this time. Elwewewewedya. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room beyond was unlike anything I'd seen in the house so far. The walls were rough stone, and the floor was covered in a dark, sticky substance that clung to my shoes. In the center of the room stood a low table, and on it, my breath caught in my throat. It was me. Or rather, it was her, the twisted version of myself I'd seen in the window. She lay on the table, her eyes closed, her lips twisted into that crooked smile. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate breaths. I stepped closer, unable to tear my eyes away. My reflection, or whatever it was, opened its eyes. They were black, endless voids that seemed to swallow the dim light of the room. "Welcome," it said, its voice soft and melodic, the same voice I'd heard in the hallway, in the clearing, in my nightmares. What are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. It tilted its head, the smile widening. "I'm you, Lydia. The real you." I stumbled back, shaking my head. No, this isn't real. You're not real." "Oh, but I am," it said, sitting up with unnatural grace. Its movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. "I've been waiting for you." "Waiting for what?" "For you to see," it said, sliding off the table. Its bare feet made no sound against the stone floor. "To see what you really are." It reached out, and I flinched as its cold fingers brushed my cheek. The contact sent a wave of nausea through me, and for a moment, the room seemed to shift. The walls pulsed like living tissue, and the floor squirmed beneath my feet. What are you doing to me?" I gasped, stumbling back. "Helping you remember," it said, its voice soft and soothing. "Helping you see." Images flooded my mind, sharp and disjointed. A car crashing into a tree. A figure standing at the edge of a clearing. A dark room, filled with whispers. And blood. So much blood. It wasn't Arthur's face staring up at me from the armchair. It was mine. "No," I whispered, clutching my head. "No, this isn't real. This isn't real." "Oh, but it is," the thing said, its smile widening. "You've been here before, Lydia. You've always been here." I fell to my knees, the room spinning around me. The thing knelt beside me, its black eyes locking with mine. "Let me show you," it whispered, its voice wrapping around me like a vice. And then the light went out. The darkness swallowed everything, a suffocating void that pressed against my skin and filled my ears with silence so absolute it felt alive. My breath was the only sound, ragged and shallow, and even that seemed muffled, as though the air itself was trying to smother me. And then, from somewhere in the blackness, "See." The voice was mine, but not mine. It carried a resonance that made my teeth ache and the hairs on my neck stand on end. A sudden light flared to life, illuminating the room in harsh, flickering tones. But the light wasn't from a bulb or a flame, it came from the walls. They pulsed with a sickly, organic glow, revealing a surface that writhed like living flesh. Veins pulsed beneath the stone, pumping something dark and viscous that oozed in slow rivulets toward the floor. I staggered to my feet, clutching the nearest wall for balance, only to recoil as it pulsed beneath my hand. The air reeked of iron and decay, thick enough to coat my tongue. In the center of the room, where the table had been, a figure now stood. It was me. No longer a twisted parody, but a perfect replica, right down to the clothes I wore. It tilted its head, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You've always known, haven't you?" it said, its voice smooth and melodic. "Known what?" I demanded, though my voice trembled, betraying my fear. It stepped closer, and I instinctively backed away, bumping into the wall. The pulsing light flickered, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with malevolent intent. "That you don't belong here," it said. "That this isn't your world." The words struck a chord deep within me, a note of recognition I couldn't ignore. Flashes of memory, or something like memory, flickered through my mind. A staircase spiraling into darkness. A door carved with symbols I couldn't understand. The sound of whispers, growing louder, louder. I don't understand, I whispered, clutching my head as the images swirled, overlapping and distorting. You do, it said, its smile widening. You've just forgotten. But that's why I'm here, to help you remember. It extended a hand toward me, its fingers pale and cold as marble. Take my hand, and I'll show you. No. I shouted, shaking my head. The room trembled, the walls groaning as though the house itself were alive and angry. The thing that wore my face lowered its hand, its expression unreadable. Still fighting, it said, almost to itself. You've always been stubborn. That's why it had to be you. What are you talking about? I demanded, my voice rising in panic. It ignored my question, taking another step closer. Its eyes were different now, no longer black voids, but mirrors. And in their reflection, I saw not myself, but the basement. Not this basement. The real basement. The vision gripped me like a vice, pulling me into its depths. I stood in the center of a room much like this one, but stripped of its grotesque pulsations. The stone walls were bare, and the air was cold and stale. The faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow. In the corner of the room, a body lay slumped against the wall. It was Arthur. His throat was torn, his eyes wide and glassy. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and still. My hands were covered in it, the sticky warmth clinging to my skin. No, I whispered, stumbling back. No, this isn't real. But it was. I remembered now. The crash. The storm. The figure in the hallway. I hadn't run from it. I had followed it. I had followed her. The vision shifted, and I was back in the writhing, pulsating room. The thing that wore my face stood before me, its mirrored eyes unblinking. You see now, it said, its voice softer, almost gentle. You were chosen. Chosen for what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. To be the bridge, it said, as though it were obvious. The words sent a chill through me, though I didn't understand why. The bridge between worlds, it continued. Between us and them. You opened the door, Lydia. You let us in. The memories crashed over me like a tidal wave. The door in the basement. The symbol carved into its surface. The feeling of something ancient and hungry stirring beyond it. I had opened it. You were always meant to, the thing said, stepping closer. That's why you came here. That's why you crashed. This place called to you, and you answered. No, I whispered, backing away. I didn't know. I didn't. You did, it said, cutting me off. And now, there's no turning back. The walls pulsed violently, the veins bursting and spilling black ichor onto the floor. The room trembled, the air filling with the sound of whispers, thousands of voices speaking in unison, their words incomprehensible but heavy with intent. The thing reached for me again, its hand cold and insistent. Take my hand, Lydia, it said. Let me show you what comes next. I hesitated, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The whispers grew louder, pressing against my skull like a physical force. But then I remembered Arthur. His lifeless body. His blood on my hands. No, I said, my voice firm. The thing's expression darkened, its mirrored eyes flashing with anger. You can't fight this, it said, its voice rising. You're already part of it. You are the bridge. I don't care, I said, backing toward the door. I'm not helping you. I'm not letting this happen. You can't stop it, it hissed, its voice no longer soft, but sharp and venomous. You can only choose how it ends. The walls trembled violently, cracks spiderwebbing across their surface. The light flickered, dimming with each pulse. I turned and ran, ignoring the pain in my knee, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the thing's voice as it screamed my name. The hallway stretched before me, impossibly long, the door at the end seeming to grow farther away with every step. The floor shifted beneath me, the stone warping and buckling like waves. The whispers followed, a cacophony of voices overlapping and echoing. Lydia. Bridge. Open. I reached the door and threw it open, spilling into the basement beyond. The normal basement. The storm raged outside the window, lightning illuminating the shadows. I didn't look back. I climbed through the window, the rain lashing against my skin as I collapsed onto the muddy ground. The forest loomed around me, dark and unyielding, but I didn't care. I was out. But as I limped into the trees, the whispers followed. Lydia. They were in my head now, inescapable, a part of me. And I knew, deep down, that I would never truly escape. The storm was relentless, the rain slicing through the air like needles. I stumbled through the forest, the mud pulling at my shoes and the branches clawing at my skin. The whispers hadn't stopped. They were louder now, threading through the howling wind, growing more insistent with every step. Lydia. Come back. You can't run. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The voices weren't outside, they were inside, coiling through my mind like tendrils of smoke. The world felt twisted, distorted. The trees loomed too tall, their skeletal branches forming a canopy that blocked out what little light the storm offered. The ground seemed to shift beneath me, a nauseating sensation that made it impossible to tell if I was moving forward or in circles. I had to keep going. A faint light appeared ahead, flickering like a candle in the darkness. I hesitated, my instincts screaming to avoid it, but my body betrayed me. My feet moved toward it, drawn by something primal and irresistible. As I got closer, I saw the light wasn't a candle but a lantern, hanging from a low branch. Its glow was unnatural, too bright and too steady, casting shadows that writhed like living things. Beneath the lantern stood a figure. Arthur. At least, it looked like him. His clothes were soaked and torn, his skin pale and glistening in the rain. But his face was wrong. His eyes were empty sockets, and his mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, stretching wider than it should. Lydia, he said, his voice a hollow echo. Why did you leave? I froze, every muscle in my body locking in place. You're not Arthur, I whispered, my voice trembling. He, or it, tilted his head, the smile never faltering. Aren't I? Didn't you see me die? Didn't you feel my blood on your hands? I shook my head, backing away. You're not real. None of this is real. Arthur took a step forward, the lantern's light casting sharp shadows across his distorted face. You can't run from this, Lydia. You opened the door. You let us in. No. I shouted, turning and bolting into the trees. The forest closed in around me, the branches clawing at my arms and face like living hands. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in a chaotic symphony. Bridge. Open. Come back. I stumbled over a root, falling hard onto my injured knee. Pain shot through my leg, blinding and sharp, but I forced myself to crawl forward. The ground beneath me shifted, the mud growing slick and warm. I looked down and saw it wasn't mud at all, it was blood, dark and viscous, pooling around my hands and knees. No, I whispered, scrambling to my feet. The blood clung to me, dripping from my fingers and soaking into my clothes. Ahead, another light appeared, brighter this time. I didn't want to move toward it, but my body seemed to have a mind of its own. The trees parted, revealing a clearing. In the center stood a massive structure, a doorway, carved from black stone and covered in the same jagged spiral symbol I had seen before. The air around it vibrated, the whispers converging into a low, guttural hum. No, I said again, backing away. This isn't real. This can't be real. But the door was real. It pulsed with a sickly light, the spiral symbol glowing faintly. And then it opened. A figure stepped through, cloaked in shadow, its form shifting and rippling like smoke. It was taller than any human, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. Its face was a void, featureless and infinite, but its presence was suffocating, a weight pressing down on my chest. "Lydia," it said, though its mouth didn't move. The word echoed inside my skull, louder than the whispers. I tried to turn and run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The figure stepped closer, its shadow stretching across the clearing to envelop me. "You brought me here," it said. "You opened the way." I didn't mean to, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "You were chosen," it said. "The bridge between worlds." "I don't want this," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't ask for this." The figure tilted its head, as if considering me. "It doesn't matter what you want. The door is open. The bridge is built. You cannot undo what has been done." The ground beneath me trembled, the blood pooling around my feet. The trees bent and groaned, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely audible. "Why me?" "Because you are hollow," the figure said. "Because you are empty, and emptiness is the key." The words struck me like a physical blow, and I felt a memory stir, a memory I had buried deep, locked away. A house, small and quiet. A family that had disappeared. My parents, my siblings, all gone, leaving me alone in a silence that had never truly left. The emptiness. "You felt it," the figure said, as though reading my thoughts. "The void within you. That is why the door called to you. That is why you answered." I shook my head, tears blurring my vision. "No. That's not true." "You know it is," it said. The whispers rose to a crescendo, the clearing spinning around me. The blood climbed up my legs, cold and thick, binding me in place. "Lydia," the figure said, its voice cutting through the chaos. "It's time to finish what you started." It raised a hand, long and skeletal, and pointed to the doorway. The spiral symbol flared, blindingly bright, and I felt its pull like a hook in my chest. "No," I said, struggling against the blood that held me. "I won't do it." "You have no choice," the figure said, stepping closer. "You are the bridge." The light from the doorway consumed everything, and I felt myself being pulled toward it, the world dissolving around me. I screamed, but the sound was lost in the void. The last thing I saw before the light swallowed me was the figure's face, or what should have been its face. It was my own. The void was endless, a suffocating blackness that pressed against my skin and filled my lungs like water. I drifted, weightless and directionless, the whispers wrapping around me like smoke. They were no longer disjointed, they spoke as one, 1,000 voices merging into a single, suffocating entity. "You are the bridge. You are the key. You are ours." I wanted to scream, but the void swallowed the sound before it could leave my throat. My mind felt stretched thin, pulled apart by the whispers, the images, the memories. I couldn't tell where they ended and I began. And then, like a thread pulled taut, everything snapped. I woke to the sound of rain, cold and insistent against my skin. My face was pressed to damp earth, the taste of mud bitter on my tongue. The forest loomed around me, dark and still, the storm reduced to a steady drizzle. I pushed myself up, my arms trembling. My knee throbbed with a dull ache, but the pain felt distant, as though it belonged to someone else. The clearing was gone. The doorway, the figure, the pulsating walls, all of it was gone. I was alone. Except for the whispers. They were faint now, a soft murmur at the edge of my hearing, but they were still there, a constant reminder of what I had seen, what I had done. "Lydia." I flinched, the sound sending a jolt of fear through me. I turned, half expecting to see the figure standing behind me, but there was nothing. Just the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. I had to get out of here. The forest seemed different now, the paths twisting and unfamiliar. No matter which direction I turned, the trees pressed closer, their branches forming a tangled canopy that blocked out the light. The whispers grew louder as I walked, rising and falling like a tide. You can't leave. You are ours. Come back. I clutched my head, trying to drown them out, but they only grew stronger, feeding off my fear. And then I saw it. Through the trees, faint and flickering, a light. Not the unnatural glow of the lantern or the doorway, but something warmer, softer. A house. The sight of it filled me with equal parts hope and dread. It was familiar, though I couldn't say why. The porch light flickered like a dying firefly, casting weak shadows across the peeling paint and sagging roof. I approached cautiously, each step slower than the last. The whispers receded as I drew closer, replaced by an oppressive silence that made my ears ring. The door was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I pushed the door open, wincing as it creaked on its hinges. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of damp wood and something metallic. The hallway stretched before me, narrow and dimly lit. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, revealing patches of stained plaster beneath. "Arthur?" I said, though I knew it was useless. The house didn't answer. I moved through the rooms, each one more unsettling than the last. The living room was empty, the furniture draped in white sheets that billowed softly in the draft. The kitchen was dark, the sink piled high with dishes that had long since rusted. But it was the staircase that stopped me in my tracks. It spiraled downward, its steps carved from the same black stone as the doorway. The symbol was there too, etched into the wood of the banister, a jagged spiral that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. I didn't want to go down. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run, but my legs carried me forward, down the stairs, into the dark. The basement was as I remembered it, damp and cold, the walls lined with shelves cluttered with jars and tools. But this time, the light was steady, casting sharp shadows that danced with every flicker of the bulb. In the center of the room stood a figure. It wasn't the shadowy creature from the doorway or the twisted parody of myself. It was me. My real self. She, or I, has stood perfectly still, her face pale and blank, her eyes wide and unblinking. She didn't move as I stepped closer, her gaze fixed on some point beyond me. "Who are you?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. She didn't respond. The whispers returned, soft at first, then louder, a crescendo that filled the room. "You are the bridge. You are the key. You are ours." "No," I shouted, my voice breaking. The figure tilted her head, her lips twisting into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You can't fight this," she said, her voice a perfect echo of mine. "You opened the door. You brought us here." "I didn't mean to," I said, backing away. "But you did," she said, stepping closer. "And now, you must finish what you started." The room began to shift, the walls pulsing and twisting, the light dimming until it was barely more than a flicker. The figure reached out, her hand cold and unyielding as it gripped my arm. "You are the bridge," she said, her voice a whisper in my ear. "You cannot escape what you are." The whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts, my fear, my very sense of self. The light flared, blinding and all-consuming, and I felt myself being pulled into it, the world dissolving around me. For a moment, there was nothing. And then there was everything. I opened my eyes to find myself standing in the middle of the forest, the rain gone, the air still and silent. The house was gone, the clearing empty, as though it had never been there. But the whispers remained. They were softer now, a constant hum at the edge of my consciousness, but they were still there, a part of me. I looked down at my hands, expecting to see blood, but they were clean. I wasn't. I knew, deep down, that I was no longer myself. The figure's words echoed in my mind, a truth I couldn't deny. I was the bridge. And the door was open.